A common occurrence when looking at next-gen planes is the wildly differing performance between one variant and the next. In contrast, for some aircraft types, the high level of performance targeted is possible across all variants. Take a look at the 787. For others, though, it isn't. In the case of the upcoming 777X, this is a series that actually has enjoyed quite a fair bit of success in recent years after a dry spell occurred during the global pandemic and just before that. But with success has come a razor focus on one variant, the 777-9. But as for the 777-8, well, you wouldn't be made fun of if you had just forgotten its existence. It remains an incredibly unfavored and a plane that doesn't look likely to change in that regard. So why do some consider this variant a failure? Most would immediately look towards the 777-8's performance in the market, which quite frankly hasn't been the level some would consider necessary to really survive or justify being built. Compared to the 777-9's order tally standing in the hundreds, the 777-8 can barely account for a couple of dozen and has rather seen cancellations than new orders. In the case of the 777X series, based on customer feedback, it's the 777-9 that shines through as the standout aircraft, with the capabilities that are required to make it so favoured, but for the smaller Dash 8, the offerings are just not as compelling. Why is this? Well, the 777-8 sits in a bit of a grey area, with the development of the A350 in the form of the Dash 1000 even, and enhancements across the 787 series, with that discussed increased maximum takeoff weight variant. The 777-8's standout features at range at the cost of capacity leave it in a position where the trade-off for some just may not be worth it. The 777-8 at times is compared to the 777-200LR. Now, this aircraft type, while highly important for specific customers, was not a variant in the broader family that, say, accumulated a high amount of orders, and to say that, it didn't necessarily expect that either. The 777-8 is yet to be produced. It's an integral part of the family, though, according to Boeing, and when you look at the 777-8F freighter, this being the newly launched one that will come to market later this decade, it shows that there's still a bit of hope for the Dash 8 numerical value, but unlike the Dash 9, it's yet to be produced and fly. It is also still early days for growth. We have to consider that while it feels like the 777X has been around forever, which at this point it has, it is still yet to fly with customers on board. The assumption generally is that if the Dash 8 is required, then there are probably better alternatives on the market that would come at a cheaper and more likely optimal spec, and that's what we've seen. It's also just generally never really considered when you take a look at airlines looking for new aircraft. You never really see the 777-8 publicly mentioned. What about replacements? Well, most aircraft will come in to carve out new markets or push boundaries of what was previously possible, may be evident through the enhancement of a single-aisle jet known as the A321neo. Planes are rarely going to redefine travel. Now, what I mean by that is, say, a new supersonic aircraft comes out, or a 50-deck plane. I know that is a bit outlandish, but you kind of get where I'm trying to go. They really just focus on the circle of life when it comes to an aircraft. The idea that if a plane is released, it has a time in the sun, and then a replacement enters. And that replacement plane is looked at elevating certain elements to make it more favourable, and obviously the key word being efficient. Most, when you take a look at their feelings on the 777-8, consider it to just be their variant. And I know that sounds really silly, but maybe you can get what I'm trying to say. It's part of the portfolio, but it's not really considered. While the 777-9 has been touted to replace high-capacity planes such as the 747 for companies like British Airways, the 777-8 is not really doing this. While it has range capabilities, airlines that desire this have made do with other alternatives that are already in the air, say the 787-9, which they deem adequate, or the A350 ULR, soon to be the A350 1000 ULR. I think one of the most interesting stories around the 777-8 relates back to the Australian flag carrier of Qantas. Remember, for many years they were targeting a plane to fulfill their Project Sunrise needs. needs, and they were one of the few airlines publicly that has, in say, the last 5 years, mentioned the 777-8. They were considering this likely, or the A350-1000. But they didn't pick the Boeing alternative for a host of reasons. They saw the Dash 1000 at Airbus as just the perfect plane for them, and with Airbus's ability to enhance it further, it seemed like a match made in heaven, and considering that the 777-8 hadn't been certified and the lack of clarity, Qantas wouldn't get this plane nearly as soon as the A350. Factors such as potential retraining of pilots, fleet commonality costs, actual uses for the variant, and more are all other things that are worth mentioning, I feel. The 777X is a fantastic plane, and while it is yet to release, many are excited about its prospects. And for most airlines, the Dash 8, while part of this family, hasn't stood out enough for big commitments to be placed, and I'd argue especially since the turn of the decade, has often been overlooked. Does this make it a failure already, or just a plane that is not optimal for most? Or do you believe this ties it in with being a failure? Let me know your thoughts as well as your belief of future performance for this unfavoured aircraft. Does the variant actually have a firm future? Or will it very much be similar to the A330-800, where the larger variant in the family is the one that is successful and then the Dash 800 kind of just fades away? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. Thanks a lot for your support. Take care, be safe, and I'll see you in a couple of days for your latest industry analysis.
And we'll fly.